banking Royal Commission, what an amazing eye-opener. We learned from that so much, that banks had charged even dead customers for advice that never got, had flogged products that they knew were duds, all that kind of stuff. And today, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg said the Morrison government would fast-track its response to the Royal Commissions by passing reforms by the end of next year. What does this mean for you? And wait a minute, end of next year? Joining me is Sky News presenter Annelise Nielsen, who covered the Royal Commission and has just written a book, published it even, about this extraordinary scandal, money spinners, how Australians were fed lies, sold spin and charged money for nothing by banks and financial advisors. Just the title alone is fantastic. Annelise Nielsen, thank you so much indeed for joining me. What are the top problems that the Royal Commission exposed and that you think the Morrison government needs to tackle?
Well, as you say, I mean, there were so many things that came out of it that were just absolutely shocking, but I did focus in on the financial advice sector because it wasn't the most significant one. When you think about it, more Australians would be affected by superannuation generally, or even insurance than financial advice. But what was in there was just some of the more shocking stuff. That's where we saw dead people getting charged fees for advice. And it's one of those things when we were walked through it at the Royal Commission, it almost sounded like it was a complete inevitability. Of course, yep, you're taking the fees, yep, you weren't reviewing, yep, of course, whoops, the person died. And so how are you going to know? And so it was just how mundane it was that made it so extraordinary. And that's the big question facing the government now, is how do you deal with these issues when they're just so pervasive in the industry and they have been hit by this seismic Royal Commission that's uncovered so many issues. And so that's going to be the big question more than just to the end of the next year. I think this will be going on for decades.
Yeah, but the government, I couldn't quite make out what the announcement was all about. So Josh Frydenberg says, I now have a plan, I'm going to fast-track it, and it's going to go to the end of next year and fast-track. Yeah, but what is the government going to do that we need it to do? Are you happy with what it plans to do?
So what the government needed to do was to look like they really are taking action on this, because they were getting absolutely hammered in the last sitting week of Parliament. During question time, it was basically all Labor had is that they could go, what are you doing about the Banking Royal Commission? Because they want to take the heat away from the other big issues that they don't have a coherent policy platform on yet. But there was serious concern that they were listening to lobbyists and they weren't moving fast enough. But this word fast-tracked, we were using it this morning, and then the more I've thought about it, the more I've thought it probably is a bit generous. What they're saying is we've put $9.3 million aside for Treasury. That's to hire more people so they can draft this legislation properly and get it through quicker. But that's against their own artificial timeline of basically as long as you could possibly take. And so it is a bit generous to say that they're fast-tracking it. But what they are doing is putting deadlines, and that's really important because this could drag out for years. And so if they do say by the end of next year this has to be done, that's a really positive step.
Yeah, well, I can understand why Labor's making hay with this, saying, what, end of next year? That's the fast track? I wonder what the slow track was. One more thing, the government announced today that our 280,000 public servants should accept that politicians are the boss and the job of public service is to do what a politician says. I thought it was bleedingly obvious all along because, as Scott Morrison said today, politicians, in the end, are the people responsible. They must face the voters. Here's the Prime Minister laying down the law to a meeting of top public servants.
At the end of the day, our ministers, my colleagues, have got to look constituents in the eye, face the public, look them in the eye and be responsible for those decisions.
Annelise, the public servants looked very unimpressed listening to this lecture, but I wonder why Morrison thought they needed to be told something so basic. In fact, if a politician isn't in charge, a minister isn't in charge of their department, I would have thought the Riot Act needs to be read to the minister, not the department.
Well, I think he's trying to set the tone. I know there were a few people saying, well, this is the government that's been in for years now, technically, and so why are we having such a laying down of the law today? But this is Scott Morrison absolutely making his mark and saying, if you're not on board with what we're doing, get out. And I know that I've spoken to a number of senior public servants who's dealt with Scott Morrison in portfolios when he was Treasurer when he was Border Protection Minister, and they've said that he's very much been like that from the get-go. When he's spoken to public servants, he's said, I don't care about the why, that's my job. I'm telling you what the why's already been sorted. We're talking about the how. How are we going to make this happen, and how do we make it happen fast? It's a great message to take to the general public. Average punters would think this is great, get it done with minimum fast, but if you don't have everyone pulling in the same direction, it's going to be very hard. And we did, that was some beautiful vision that Tom Connell pulled out of the public servants looking pretty bemused by the meeting today.
Well, I can understand it, Annelise. I can understand it. That is how the policy... my question is, why does it need it to be said? Does it mean that it hasn't been happening, that ministers haven't been in charge of their own departments? But anyway, Annelise Nielsen, thank you so much indeed for talking to us tonight. And good luck with the book, by the way. Great book.